You know it's not the right call, but you just don't have the bandwidth for a fight. 20 minutes later, they're still on the iPad, dinner's cold, and now you're irritated with them, even though deep down, you know that you abandoned your own boundary first. Hi, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Ask Mom Parenting podcast, where we take the mystery and the yelling out of modern parenting and offer real life help for parents. I'm Sue, and with me is Randy, and whether you're deep in the toddler tantrums, navigating tween or teen drama, or somewhere in between, you'll get clarity and actionable tools one episode at a time. If you'd like to support our podcast, please share it with another parent that you think might be helped by what we're putting out, and it really helps us grow the podcast. So, how many of us relate to this? Dinner is about ready, and your child asks for 20 more minutes to watch YouTube. They've already been on for an hour, and you know getting them to come to the table is going to feel impossible. And still, a yes comes out of your mouth. You know it's not the right call, but you just don't have the bandwidth for a fight. 20 minutes later, they're still on the iPad, dinner's cold, and now you're irritated with them, even though deep down, you know that you abandoned your own boundary first. That is the moment that we're talking about today. Today's episode, are you a people pleaser raising a strong-willed child? Here's a pattern that I see all the time. When a parent was raised to be easy, maybe that was their natural temperament, or maybe they had a controlling parent, or maybe being agreeable was just the path of least resistance, or maybe they're an empath and they don't want to feel someone else's bad feelings. So they learn to be polite, helpful, flexible. They didn't want to make things harder or upset people or be disliked. They just want to keep the peace. That easy person then becomes a parent. And the child they're raising has zero interest in keeping anything peaceful. This child questions everything, pushes back, has big opinions, and suddenly parenting feels so confusing because your child is nothing like you. You were trained or you learned to comply, and they were born ready to negotiate. And there's nothing like becoming a parent to expose the patterns that we thought we already outgrew. Kids put that mirror on us, don't they? So when a people-pleasing parent is raising a strong-willed child, they're not just managing unfamiliar behavior, they're being asked to outgrow old wiring, because the parenting style they inherited was built around compliance. The child they're raising showed up wired for resistance. And just to be clear, the goal is not to corral that strong-willed child into submission, even though some days that sounds wildly appealing. The goal is to learn how to parent and lead that child without losing yourself.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially when you're talking about the goal is to learn how to lead without losing yourself, because I can definitely relate to that. I think my parents sort of unknowingly raised me to be a people pleaser because just on how they were parented, like compliance was how I think they learned to be a parent. Both my parents, came from household where, compliance was essential, I think, for survival. My mom was raised by a single mom, and there were 5 kids in her house. And my father was raised a little more rurally. They, were, didn't have a lot of money. So again, compliance was just, staying out of the way, right? It equaled staying out of the way and not putting that stress on the parents. So I think that's kind of how my parents, they defaulted to how their parents raised them. And also, that was my experience. And then, I graduated college. I actually took some jobs working with kids, in various different capacities. In almost every organization I worked with there's kind of this underlying tone of compliance there. So I have personal experience and professional experience in really kind of leaning into compliance, even if it was an undertone. So then fast forward to I become a parent and I think, oh, this parenting thing is going to be easy. Like I've worked with kids, like this is going to be great. And my daughter, she showed some strong-willed characteristics really early on. I didn't even know what it was until I started reading about it and then heard this term. And I'm like, oh, that's her. And then I'm like digging into all the reading about it. And it definitely, comes up in my parenting And like you said, it kind of creates this confusion because it's not anything like you're really familiar with. So I definitely think it's important to talk about because it does impact how we parent. And then there's a lot that goes into the mind if you're a parent experiencing this.
Isn't it funny how parenting, we go along and we're just ourselves, and then we choose our partners and our who we're dating, and we find somebody compatible with us. Then we have our child, and they're completely different. And in our case, like in my case, I've said before, I never met a rule I didn't want to break. And I was the strong-willed person being raised, and my daughter is a rule follower. And I'm just, and so it's like the opposite. And I'm still making fun of her today over how I'm like, girl, blur the lines. It's okay. And she's in law school, and she's trying, I'm like, okay, that suits you. But it's really
Yeah.
funny how we're only used to ourselves, and then we're used to having somebody in our life that we are compatible with, and then we have children, and it's like, whoa, what am I supposed to do with this? So let's figure out what is really going on underneath. Let's understand that people pleasing isn't kindness. Okay, it's often fear wearing good manners. So if you're in this pattern, you're probably not trying to be permissive. You're trying to be kind and to keep the peace because that is your comfort default. But underneath that kindness, there is often fear. And that's fear of being mean, maybe fear that you might damage the relationship or be disliked, fear of triggering a bigger meltdown, or maybe fear that a strong no will make you feel like the parent you didn't want to become. And this is where it kind of gets challenging because people pleasing can feel like kindness. It looks nice on the outside, but underneath, you're not making a parenting decision. You're trying to escape emotional discomfort. Your emotions and their emotions become blurred, and you can't tell the difference between who's feeling what. The quiet questions running through your mind while raising a strong willed child might possibly be: how do I say no without feeling guilty? How do I stop negotiating everything? And why does holding a limit feel so hard for me? And the answer is because you're not just parenting your child. You're also parenting your child while your own nervous system is trying to drag you back into the role that you learned early. And that's to keep everybody happy, don't make trouble, and be easy to love. And while that may have helped you survive childhood, it will not help you lead a strong willed child. One technique that I like to use in coaching is the feeling check versus the leadership check. It's just kind of a quick little check in for yourself. And when a people pleasing parent makes a decision, they often ask, how will this make my child feel? But to rewire your patterning, you want to ask, what does this teach my child to expect from me? The feeling check is, will my child be upset? And the leadership check is this boundary necessary, reasonable, and good for my child long term? Because their disappointment does not get to overrule your leadership.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's really important, especially since I know, like, for me, that really resonates because that's exactly what I like to think about more the long term. I try to keep myself in the long term of parenting. And because I really think that's like really important. And I think what you just talked about with this check is really helpful, and it keeps you kind of moving forward into where you want to be versus what's comfortable for you. Because just like you said, like even when you decide that you need to make a change and you decide to change it, your brain just loves to pull you back to what it knows. And
Mhm.
especially if you're a people pleasing mom, you've learned that people pleasing feels safe even when it's not working, even when something doesn't work. And the brain just loves to keep going back to what's familiar. And that's why I think coaching is really important, because it's not just about learning the new skill, it's about having someone hold you accountable when that old wiring, like you talked about, kicks in, because of it will. And likely we can't always see that ourselves. Um, so I was just curious, Sue, when you're coaching a people pleasing mom raising a strong willed kid, what are some ways that that shows up in their life?
Okay, well, as you were talking, before I get to that, It's funny because we talk about patterning, and I have had this issue with my back for years and years and years. And I just finally, I've gone to, I've done energy work, I've done all this stuff, chiropractic. I finally went to this rehab lady, um, and she nailed it and said, "Oh, you're holding, you're arching, you're overextending, and you're holding everything in this spot. No other muscles are working." Anyway, you talk about patterning, and you were talking about like how to make real change, and it's so hard because even talking during the podcast, I'm like, how do I relax this? Anyway, it takes an awareness to go, okay, I am doing something, and what I'm doing, while it feels comfortable to hold, I have to relax it. And it's like I have to see, oh, there's an issue. And in my case, it's pain, but in the parenting case, it's like I've got this strong-willed child, and we're in fisticuffs every day, and we're having these fights, and I have to take ownership as a parent. And go, oh, well, I guess my people-pleasing ways aren't going to work for this child. What will work? And how? So getting back to what you asked me is like, how does this look in real life? There are a few common ways that it shows up. So a mom, and I'm not picking on moms and dads, but anyway, for the purposes of my conversation. So she'll reason when she needs to decide. She'll spend 20 minutes explaining why they aren't buying the toy or hoping the child will agree with the boundary before she holds it. But strong-willed kids don't often need more explanation. What they need is that a decision is actually real. So she asks when she means to instruct. Can you put your shoes on? That's a typical question that, any mom would ask. Do you want to get in the car? Can you come for dinner? And then the child says no, because technically you asked. That is not defiance. That's your child finding an open door in your language. And is that annoying? Yes. But technically it's accurate. Also, yes, right? So make it a confident sentence. Put your shoes on. We're getting in the car. It's time for dinner. Come to the table. Another way that it shows up in real life is that she negotiates when a boundary would work better. So instead of, 5 more minutes, okay, just 5 more. Okay, but this is the last time. We allow ourselves to keep blurring that boundary. And now the child has learned that that boundary is not really a boundary. It's an opening offer. This is where my parenting in advance method works. We agreed to 30 minutes, not 5 more. Shut it down. A statement, very confident and leadership tone. Another way that it shows up is that she'll pre-soften her statement, or she'll post apologize every no. I'm sorry, honey, but we can't today, okay? I know, I feel bad. Now the child feels your guilt and will push even harder. This is such a fun game for a strong-willed child. They are actually losing respect for you in these moments because your uncertainty is teaching them that you're not really in charge and that you aren't willing to hold your boundary. I know my oldest always did that and exploited me whenever I had a tired day or a weak moment. And one of the last ways that this shows up in real life is that she avoids conflict until she explodes. She's holding it in. If we're honest with ourselves, people pleasing doesn't prevent conflict. It delays conflict until you're too resentful to handle it well. You've trained people that your boundaries are an ever-changing landscape, and then you wonder why no one listens. You're trying to parent in a way that feels emotionally safe for you, but it's not creating actual safety for your child. Kids feel safest when they know that their adult is in charge and stands for their boundary. This leadership is what gives kids confidence and makes them listen to you the first time.
Yeah, that is so funny when you were just talking because I can really relate to some of what you said because this thing I started doing, and it's really recent, which is interesting. I started to say, especially I've noticed to my son, I'll say to him, like in the morning, do you want to put your shoes on? And instead of saying, like, it's time to, get your shoes on, get to the bus. And I catch myself saying that. And then my son kind of comes back with, no. And it kind of is more like a joke at this point. But and then when I kind of like question that, he's like, well, you said, do I want to? Like he's like,
Oh,
yeah, he's like, kind of calling me out on it.
They will call it up. Yep. Yep.
It's so funny. And I'm like, honestly, like he's not wrong. And I'm like, yeah, I know I said that. And it's weird because it's kind of been relatively new, but it is one of those tiny language habits that, I've had to like remember maybe before I say it. And it can seem harmless, but it can definitely create confusion, especially with kids. And so you mentioned holding some boundaries, which I think is really important. But what are some other maybe practical things parents can do to start breaking these people pleasing patterns?
Well, there's 5 shifts that I talk about in some of my workshops. But one of the things that came to mind when you were just talking, I remember I was listening to a podcast that I love. It is a comedian that I really love. And I noticed that she ended every sentence with a question mark. You know, those people like they, and and they always sound uncertain.
Yeah.
And as it started to become, aware during the podcast I was listening to her, I started going, oh, do I do that? And I kind of realized that, sometimes I did and finish a sentence in a question. And that just, whether it's my husband or in business or in a workshop, people don't take you seriously. So I now try to end my sentences on a downward, like a more guttural sound, to just sound like, hey, this is what I said, this is what I meant. Anyway, so there's 5 shifts that I talk about that work to make real change for people pleasing parents. Number one, stop asking fake questions. It's not a real choice, so don't phrase it like one. A strong-willed child will find the loophole. So instead of asking, do you want to clean up? Say, cleanup comes before snack. Again, that little parenting in advance mentality that I teach is I'm gonna put it up front instead of asking, are you ready to clean up? No, no, no. Hey, cleanup comes before you get the snack. Questions are for choices and statements are for boundaries. That one little language shift can clean up a lot of unnecessary pushback. Number two, say it once and then let the system talk. Repeating yourself, especially with strong-willed kids, teaches your child that your first words were just practice and open to pushback because it's been working that way. Say it clearly once, then move into the system, not more words and not more emotion. So, for example, screens go off when dinner starts. That's something I'm establishing up front so that they can shut it down and have time. I'm not reacting when dinner is ready and it's getting cold and now I'm pissed off, like in my earlier example. If they don't turn it off, you don't keep explaining why dinner matters and nutrition matters and family time matters. You simply follow the system. Screen is done for tonight. Tomorrow is a new day. Your system and statement does all the heavy lifting. Do not be tempted to come back, circle back, apologize, or soften the statement. Number three, let disappointment be their job. So, this is one of the biggest aha moments for people pleasing parents. Remember this, your job is to hold the boundary. Your child's job is to have their feelings about it. Don't steal their job. A disappointed child is not a damaged child. A frustrated child is not an unsafe child. Disappointment is never a parenting emergency. It is emotional weather, and we can let it pass without building a rescue boat. I know that's hard, but sometimes these reframes will stick and help us be in the moment and understand the impact of our words and our sentences and our tone. And number four, stop selling the boundary. People pleasing parents often try to sell the boundary like, okay, but it'll be fun. It's not that bad. You'll understand later. Please don't be mad at me. I'm not for sale as their parent, and neither are the boundaries that we agreed to. Instead, try, I know you don't like it. The answer is still no. No fanfare, no explanation, or you can be mad, but I'm not changing what we agreed to. Or I'm not asking you to love this. I'm asking you to follow through. We don't have to love everything that we're being asked to do. That is calm authority. And shift number 5 is to use a mantra reminder to stay steady. If you've listened to the podcast before, I love mantras. They're just these quick redirects. They're little statements that I put up on my fridge or on my bulletin board, something that really resonates for me, and I will like, ooh, that's a good one, and I'll put it up, and then that helps me break my patterns. So, our brains love what is familiar, even when what's familiar is our people-pleasing ways. So, research shows that new habits take about 66 days on average to become automatic. So, in the meantime, your brain needs a replacement route, and that's what a mantra does. It gives you one simple sentence to reach for before the old pattern grabs the wheel. It's like a GPS for your nervous system, a small little redirect phrase that helps you take fewer wrong turns until the new road becomes familiar. So, a mantra like, I can handle being disliked for just a few minutes. Or even stronger, my child can be upset and I can stay steady. People pleasing parents tend to interpret their child's displeasure as danger. So having a little line that brings them back into leadership and that moment is very helpful. Use it silently before responding or just have it put up somewhere so that it's a great reminder. So, say if your child says, "You're so mean," the parent's internal mantra might be, "I can handle being disliked for a minute." And then out loud, you can say, "I know you're upset. The answer's still no." That's where the work comes in. And it's an ongoing awareness because breaking patterns is difficult. As I said, it takes a long time. And I know that from my back. I'm constantly reminding myself to break that pattern. So I know it's hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I think those are really great shifts. Pretty practical, easy. I think easy to implement. It's just about consistency. And what I loved about listening to those shifts as you were talking was it really, I think, it really helps parents, make these shifts without necessarily like stifling their kids. Like, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. Because one thing that is helping me kind of raise a strong-willed child is understanding, and it took a little bit, but you kind of do some reading and you come around to the understanding that these are qualities that are actually qualities you want your kids to have. Strong-willed kids, they have qualities that can be tough to parent in the moment, but they tend to have strong leadership qualities. They are less likely to fall into peer pressure. They're persistent, they're resilient, and many, grow up to be change makers in the world. So that's what I loved about the shifts you were just talking about, because a lot of that and what we've talked about today, I think will really help parents cultivate those qualities instead of stifling them. And then I think it kind of forces us to grow as parents too.
As you're talking, I'm thinking that it's actually a lot easier and takes less effort to parent a strong-willed child. And when
Mhm.
I think about when I was raised and part of the problems that I had with my own mom growing up, because of my strong-willed nature, she was really trying, like, again, we talked earlier about fear. She was really trying to, you know, hammer down on my rules. And I'm like, honestly, we tend to turn out okay. I mean, for the most part, our kids turn out okay, but a strong-willed child actually needs a lot less parenting and managing. And if you really give these kids this broad view of just very few rules, like I've already talked about, they're a lot less, needing hands-on parenting. Whereas some of these quiet kids that are off in the corner and they don't really talk to you very much, those you kind of have to be really on top of. So in a way, it's a gift. Having a strong-willed child is a true gift. And like you said, it does make it difficult to parent them, but they tend to be a little bit more successful, like a little bit more entrepreneurial or whatever. They do self-advocate. So let's talk about how a self-advocating child ends up training us and what they really need from parents. If we're willing to pay attention, kids who strongly advocate for themselves often show us where our authority was never clearly built. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean that they are very good at finding our weak spots. And my oldest, as I've mentioned, has done that very well for me over the years. From a very young age, his ability to question, push back, and advocate for himself forced me to tighten my language and sharpen my responses. I learned quickly that I had to be on top of my game with him. A moment of weakness got exploited and a moment of discipline got argued with. And as exhausting as that can be, I also saw something else. As an entrepreneur, I recognize that same independence as a skill set. Hard to parent? Yes. Useful in life? Absolutely. Because the same child who questions everything at home may one day be the adult who doesn't follow the crowd, okay? Doesn't collapse under pressure and doesn't hand over their power just because someone else has a louder opinion. They stand for something. But that only happens if we shape it and not cater to it. Kids who push back are also learning what works. They learn if I push long enough, mom explains more. If I cry enough, mom changes her answer. If I act offended, mom softens. And if I say, you're mean, mom starts proving that she's not. If I keep negotiating, the boundary will move. So now the child isn't just pushing back, they're studying the system. And yes, they really are that crafty. Kids are so much smarter than we realize. They repeat what gets results. And people-pleasing parents often don't realize that they're teaching their child which version of resistance works best. So instead of asking, why is my child so difficult? Ask, what has my child learned works on me? That question is not to shame you. It's meant to give you your power back. If you want a tiny bit of homework, if you're one of those parents that likes homework, and I know a lot of the parents that I work with do, try this for 1 week and don't try to fix anything. Just track the resistance. When your child pushes back, write down 3 things. If you find yourself having a power struggle with this strong-willed child, just write a little note and say, what did they want? Did they want more screen time? Did they want a snack, a toy, a later bedtime? What were they pushing back on? Where were they trying to control the plan? And then what resistance method did they use? Were they whining? Were they arguing, crying? Were they using guilt, anger, ignoring you? What was their method? And then write down, what did I do next? Did I explain? Did I over explain? Was I repeating? Did I give in? Did I threaten, yell, or negotiate? Or did I stay calm, follow through? You're looking for the pattern because the pattern will show you the payoff. If whining gets 5 more minutes, whining will continue. If arguing gets a 12-minute lecture and all your attention, then arguing will continue. Because remember, kids do value your attention, whether it's positive or negative. It's attention. If guilt gets the boundary softened, then guilt will continue. But if calm follow-through gets the same result every time, the resistance starts losing power. And this kind of intentional awareness is what I teach in my parenting in an advanced method. We're not just reacting to the behavior after it happens. We're studying the pattern and we're removing the payoff. We're building a structure that our child can trust even when they don't like it. So resistance-loving kids need parenting that isn't easily moved off center. They need us to have the ability to say, that doesn't work for me, without needing a 3-page paragraph explanation and a permission slip. Your child's strong will may be the very thing that helps you find your own. If this episode has you relating and thinking, this feels like me, that's a good sign, because it means that you might be ready to have some help tightening up some of your responses to your child. And that's the work that I do with moms in coaching. If you would like to talk about what that looks like for you, you can go to my website, askmomparenting.com/coaching. Thank you very much for listening and happy parenting.